bring in Tom Teague, and we're going to talk everything. We're going to talk about everything. Here comes Tom. Hey, man, thanks for coming on this morning.
How are you?
So, wow, let's start with the big kahuna, Epstein. It's really ugly. It's dark, man. I mean, I saw this text. I think it's real, where he's like, "Yeah, I had a little girl in the bed, and she was telling me Jesus was going to save her." And
I saw that.
And oops. I mean, dude. I mean, it doesn't get any darker than that.
I think the whole idea of we're being run by a bunch of globalist pedophile Satanists is probably, not so much conspiracy anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, these degenerates that are running everything, I mean, and trying to prescribe to us these lives where we need to consume less energy and be happy, miserable, and eat bugs. I just, it's hard for me to listen to that anymore. And my big takeaway from the Epstein stuff was that it's not so much, that Epstein was necessarily working for, the CIA or Mossad or something like that, but it's that the CIA and Mossad are working for the globalists, Bill Gates, the Rothschilds, all these people. And like, it's a whole setup to impose the policies they want and to make them all rich from exploiting other countries and their resources and, all this stuff. So, I mean, that, and to hear how these people operate, it's crazy. Like, they completely operate under a different set of laws than we do, obviously. But it's really bad. It's really bad, and it's disappointing.
Well, and it's psychotic. I mean, whatever the word is, sociopathic. I mean, where you have zero empathy for innocent children,
and they clearly don't. I mean, and it's clearly a problem, and they don't want to talk about it.
And
but
your microchip.
It's just terrible.
So how is Trump doing fighting? What's your take on what's going on with our president?
My take is that I don't think Trump, like, everyone talks about him being a king, and if he were a king, he would be able to just arrest these people and you'd never see him again, because we all know they're really guilty. We all know they've done really bad things, but it's just, I think part of the problem is that, you've got the judicial system set up in such a way. I mean, they tried to have a grand jury indict Slotkin for basically calling for, a revolt against the executive and the Constitution, and the presidential's power, and the grand jury didn't convict her, and it was, I'm assuming it was Pirro, so it was a DC grand jury. I think, Trump's limited into what he can do, and I think what he's really doing is trying to sort of expose these guys and create public opinion and get that on his side, so he can actually get more stuff done. And I think, the U.S. as well as a lot of the world is just, it's a mob rule. If you get public opinion on things, then you can get stuff done. If you don't, you can't. And you've got, corrupt judges, and you've got a corrupt system, and it's all been set up by these people. And I think genuinely Trump is trying to change that, but I think he's very limited in terms of what he can do to change it, So,
well, you had the same thing you mentioned, not being able to get a indictment. I mean, look at Letitia James. I mean, they dropped everything. They had her, buttoned up, and then I don't know the
these
details.
People are so guilty. It's incredible. And they actually did worse than what they accused him of doing in the first place. And they didn't get in any trouble. The system is completely corrupt, and he's fighting against that. So it's not like, I think the best outcome in this whole thing is that we get popular opinion to have a major shift. And that's what we're gonna, how we're gonna win. We're not gonna win by him rounding up people and arrest them. It's just not gonna happen.
So what about the Fed? We were talking prior to the show here, and you've got some interesting comments or insight, I should say, onto what's happening with the Fed and Trump. I mean, what do you see going on?
So, if you go back and you look at, economic data and how the Fed reacted, and this is being talked a lot about by, the likes of Warsh and Bessent and Stan Druckenmiller's mentioned things about it, and Kudlow's all over it. A lot of the economic people in Trump's cabinet are sort of focused on this. If you have to characterize the Fed over the last sort of 20 years, kind of just before the GFC, Great Financial Crisis, there's been a view, and I think this is also in the Western world, that high growth is bad, and it's rewarded governments and given them the ability to spend money, and it's sort of choked the economy and run it on a much lower level than it's capable of. So if you look at all those years, like post GFC, during the Obama years, we had anemic economic growth. We were exporting all our jobs and a lot of the services to China, creating a new supply chain at the expense of workers. And that's when the sort of K-shaped economy started. But there's this like prevailing wisdom in the current Fed that growth is like a four-letter word. It's bad. It leads to inflation. And meanwhile, it has had nothing to do with inflation. It's just we came out of COVID, and I've said this like a ton of times on your show, but China didn't reopen until 15 months later. So the supply chain was squeezed. And even this Fed admits that, and that led to massive amounts of inflation. And, it takes some time to get through that. But I think the big difference in Trump is they see growth as a good thing, and it benefits all the people in the country. It also takes the onus of solving problems away from the government and sort of puts it into the private sector's hands, where I think arguably it always should have been. And instead of the Fed standing out there and raising rates every time we have growth, and then buying bonds and lowering rates every time, and doing government programs and spending when we don't, I think it's very simple. This Fed that we're going to have with Warsh and the Treasury under Bessent is going to be, let's grow and I think you're seeing that being priced in the market. The market's a very big discounting mechanism in it. It has one, and I think you're starting to see people look at possibly having longer cycles. So, stocks that are a little bit more boring and more cyclically oriented, people were like renting them. And what I mean by that is you would buy them for a trade. You wouldn't own them for years necessarily, because the economic cycles weren't lasting that long. I think, the view of Trump is this country needs to grow very quickly, and we need to grow our way out of our debt crisis. And I think all that is becoming like sort of realized by this Fed, and it's going to get into place. And I think we're going to have, some really good years of growth and longer cycles. And that's what the market is sort of saying right now.
Well, that's kind of an entrepreneurial mindset. I remember my uncle talking about, he was an entrepreneur and very successful. And he's like, look, when I had a problem, I just grew my way out of it. Right. I mean, well,
everyone knows that when you have a deficit and you've got a lot of debt, or you got a lot of credit card debt, you're not going to just pay it off by sitting in your house. You're going to have to go out and make money some way. Right. Yeah. And we've kind of forgotten that over the years, during the course of this, because, having low rates and low growth works, that the government can solve all our problems. It's like a central planning model. And the only realistic way, and a lot of bond guys still haven't realized this yet, but if you look at Europe, not just the US, but if you look at Europe, countries are being penalized, and their bond markets are being penalized by the overall amount of debt they have outstanding and how much borrowing they have to do. We're no longer in this MMT world where, borrowing doesn't matter. It does matter, and bond markets are starting to penalize people for it. So I actually think a lot of people are wrong this year. I think, as the economy grows, I think our bonds will actually start doing better. And also, if the Fed does cut rates, which I think they should do, the market knowing that rates are going to stay low or longer, I just don't believe it's going to cause inflation, just that thing alone. And it's hard to find that historically. Usually there's always some kind of supply issue when we have inflation. So, I'm very optimistic, and I think this Fed's, under Warsh will do the right thing.
So you mentioned Europe. I know you're very connected there. What are people saying? I mean, I'm of the opinion it's like the assassin's mace. The Chinese have this theory that you infiltrate and you weaken someone, and when they realize what you're doing, it's too late. Is that Europe?
I don't know if it's too late yet. I don't know if it's ever too late anywhere, but I think, usually when it's too late, you have some sort of like violent uprising, right?
Yeah,
that's when things aren't, the mechanisms that allow you to change things without violence don't work anymore. I think if you look at, Austria, if you look at Germany, certainly with the AfD, if you look at the UK with the Reform Party, if you look at France with RN, I think the people that live in these countries want change. I think they're not buying into this like prescribed, WEF goal of like, we're going to consume less and we're not going to grow economically. And, they've done real damage. I mean, I was looking this week at Germany and looking at how much their energy policies have hurt them. And a lot of people don't even want to talk about it, right? They're just like, oh, it's a one-off thing. And Germany got rid of their nukes. Like they're in deep trouble. Their industrial production is going down. They're laying off people. Like that country has traditionally been, a very industrialized economy. And, so I think there's a big rejection underway. And I think if you listen to the like talking heads in the EU, they're telling you one thing, but if you look at how the elections are going and how these populist parties are going, it's telling you a completely different thing. And at some point, they're not going to be able to. It's really weird. It's kind of a joke. It's like, the populists win and they win the majority of this, or they win the biggest amount of seats in the parliament. But then the communists, the Greens, the left, and the supposedly conservatives form a coalition to block them. Yeah, I mean, it's a joke. It's not real. This is like, being run by elites again, and it's not listening to sort of the people's voice in this. So I think Europe is going to change. And I think having, one of the problems for Europe is having Trump and seeing what's happening in the US. And if we have economic success, all these countries are going to look at their leaders and go, what's going on here? Right.
Well, I talk to Europe, especially Germans a lot, and I just have to look at them, and they're in denial. I mean, a lot of them just don't want a deal, and I just confront them like, do you have the will to survive as a person, as your family, as your culture? I mean, dude, you're there. I mean, you got to do something, right? I mean, you can't just like laugh it off and say, oh, the media, and make jokes about the media being controlled, and they're killing your kids. I mean, when do you stand up? Yeah,
10 seconds.
Yeah, go ahead.
People are aware of that, and it's going to take some time, and they're the elites in these countries that run the system are doing everything, and it's almost what's amazing about it. Like, if you go back to the Epstein files, the guy was obviously working for a lot of different leaders in the world. So there's like this big connection in the West, at least we can see, between all these leaders and what they do. And a lot of the tactics that they're using to try and undermine and trying to prevent the populists from winning are exact same things they were doing in this country. Bogus like investigations, bogus trials, trying to Marine Le Pen, suspending her, saying she can't run again. They tried to do the same thing with Trump. It's the same playbook, so I mean, I'm hopeful that this is like a paradigm shift, and I'm hopefully going to see this stuff start working, but it's not an easy battle.
A warm welcome here at the National Press Club. Welcome to the journalists, welcome to the Embraer team, and welcome to the other guests that we have here. We're going to announce, and as some of you guessed it right when they came in, the first E2 order by an American operator. And that operator is Avello. We believe this is really a strategic shift to unlock profitability for the customer. I'm very pleased that we have Andrew Levy here as the CEO of Avello, and I'm very pleased to give the stage to share a little bit more about what Avello is going to do with the E2 195. Thank you very much.
Couldn't be more excited to be here as part of this historic announcement. We have such a great cultural fit as companies, so we're very, very excited to be Embraer's newest customer. We launched our airline in April of 21, and our target is focusing on small secondary airports of large metro areas. We've carried over 8 million customers since we started on 63,000 flights. And we've done all these things with 1,200 of the greatest crew members I could ever imagine having, and many of them are here with me today. This is the right airplane for us. It's going to open up opportunities for us that no other aircraft can serve. The best thing about the airplane, of course, is you will not find a middle seat on this airplane. It doesn't exist. We won't have any to offer. It's going to be the best cabin in the United States, and we're so excited about that. This is going to elevate our experience to the highest level, and we think our customers are absolutely going to love the airplane.
For the first time ever, we're bringing you MyPillow mattresses and mattress toppers for as low as $99.98. Remember, sleep's all about temperature and pressure points. Whatever sleep needs you have, we have the right technology for you. Like our MyPillow mattress topper, our queen size has over 10,000 individual comfort supports to help relieve your pressure points. And how about our 3-inch Hybrid Plus mattress topper? It's infused with copper and silver to help your body get the restorative sleep it needs. And our MyPillow and Case Coil mattresses, I personally helped develop these mattresses to make sure they have everything needed to give us great sleep. Plus, they're made right here in the USA, and they ship right to your front door absolutely free. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to get MyPillow mattresses and toppers for as low as $99.98 and free shipping.
I had Ed Dowd on earlier in the week, and two things. One, well, I just start with China. He thinks China's in real trouble. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the fundamentals of China, it doesn't look good, but people are saying like they're exporting more now than they ever have. But you never know the real story out of China. They've been fudging their economic numbers for years. So you can't really, there's no reliability. People are not going to a lot of people are talking about the dollar and how, the dollar's like, you want to get out of it. It's just fiat, but there's nowhere else to go that's as liquid as the dollar. And it's certainly not the yuan.
That's what Martin Armstrong is saying. He's like, this dollar death thing is a joke because
what are you going to replace it with? There is nothing that is significant enough to replace the dollar. And it's also going to be hard not to want to use the dollar when we are the biggest economy in the world. And if we have the growth that people are talking about, we're going to have, if we grow at 5%, people are going to want to own dollar assets.
So when does that growth kick in? I mean, Ed was always also talking about the housing market really collapsing in different sectors. And, I guess there's a rejiggering of the employment numbers coming out. Like there was some math change in the numbers, like there's going to be a drop of 1 million jobs or something, one-time revision. That's the word I was looking for, revision.
I think the revisions, well, I mean, one thing under this new Fed, I think is important. A lot of this data that we're getting is stale data. For example, when they go, the biggest component in the CPI, which is a measure of inflation, is owner equivalent rent. And how they gather that data is they basically send out a bunch of forms to people and wait till they fill them out. So sometimes when this information gets in, it's way past its due date. So you're getting, 6-month-old information on where rents are. And it's hard, if that's the biggest component of the CPI, to understand, kind of what's going on. I think that the new Fed's going to change a lot of that stuff. So we're going to get better data live. People are already starting to use this CPI now thing where they can see like live every day where the CPI is, and it's much lower than what it's showing. So I think that'll come through. With regards to the growth in the economy and when that's going to hit, I think we already saw it in the fourth quarter. It's already starting. I think that, the housing market is, a lot of that is just there for the simple fact that rates are too restrictive now, and we haven't had mortgage rates have a meaningful move. We need to get like around 5% or below 5% on mortgage rates in order for that housing market to start churning. And I think, Trump is, look, it's election year. He's going to go for it. So I think the growth is probably more coming sooner rather than later. And as soon as you get a new Fed in that starts cutting rates and we go from restrictive to a more neutral position, I think you're going to see that the markets discount that very quickly. You know, when
so
the Fed
what is yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
When the Fed comes out after cutting rates in the press conference after the Fed meeting and says, well, we're done. That's it. No more. The market starts believing that, and it doesn't discount more rate cuts. So the economy doesn't move in the same way as if the Fed came out with a more dovish stance, like, you know, we think inflation, the biggest part of it's behind us. We're going to be lowering rates in the future. That gets companies more bullish. It creates those like animal spirits, and people want to go more into the investment cycle. But I think a lot of that's happening, but I think housing is just, it's too rate dependent right now, and rates are still too high for it to really start moving. And that's 16% of the economy.
So Warsh comes in what, end of March?
May. Unless
we're
you know, Powell does something honorable and resigns earlier.
It's not happening. So
I don't think he's going to.
So the first FOMC meeting where there might be something is what, June?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I'm not. I think Powell's got 2 more Fed meetings in him.
Okay.
That we're going to have to listen to his prattle.
Okay. I'm just trying to, I mean, so we're talking summertime, midsummer, which the timing for the election.
So we've got March and April left, and then June. Yeah, May's an empty month.
Okay, so it'll be June. Okay. You're a cattle man. Beef prices are really high. When is that going to come down?
Well, beef takes a lot longer to, you have to grow the cows out, right? So chickens are very quick. So if you don't, like, you know, when we came out of COVID, and this is my, you know, my theory on the whole thing, but when we came out of COVID, if you think about it, I think restaurants use like 20% of the food supply, something like that. So restaurants reopened, and there clearly was not enough food to go around. And that's one of the reasons that prices went through the roof, because restaurants reopen, you know, there's just not enough to go around. With chicken and pork, I think it's a little bit faster. Well, certainly with chicken, it's a lot faster. I've got chickens, and they start raising eggs and stuff very quickly. So, you know, I think with beef, you had, you know, still high feed prices. And you just have, you know, basically too small herds right now. And cattle and hoof are still commanding a pretty high price. So, you know, I think it's going to take a little bit. And I think, you know, I was talking to somebody who's in the business as well yesterday, and they were just, you know, they were complaining about some of the imports. But I think, you know, you need some of these imports because it does stabilize prices a little bit, you know. So, but it's hard, you know, going back on that, when the Fed goes and raises rates by 500 basis points, farmers are not really feeling like borrowing money to add capacity, right? So that's, you know, that's one of the problems, and it creates this start and stop kind of effect. You know, it's like you raise rates, and then you think that prices are going to come down, but then they don't really come down because you're not getting to the supply that you had before the event, right? So I think it'll take some time, but I think within the next year, cattle prices will come in. You'll get bigger herds, you know.
So there's a real, I guess, argument going on where interest rates should be. I mean, I'm an ex-bond guy. I mean, the average 10-year historically is around 5%. I mean, we're just getting back to the average, and some people are saying they need to stay there. Do you think this? I know Trump wants lower rates, and the economy would do well with lower rates, but where do you think the 10-year will stabilize over time?
Well, it's an interesting thing. You know, I was looking yesterday. So negative real interest rates are when interest rates are actually, you know, interest rates minus inflation gives you a negative number, right? So the entire Obama presidency, we basically had negative real interest rates, right? We currently don't. And that just shows me how in the pocket these guys are. I mean, that's just my own personal opinion. I think the 10-year bonds, my own belief is we're going to have like a month sometime between now and, maybe June, where you're going to have a major rally on longer bonds because people are going to really start understanding that they're going to cut rates and you have to own bonds because you're not going to get the same yield in the front end as you did. We've got, around 21% of our total debt is bills, which mature within a year. They're issued and mature within a year. And then you've got a third of our debt rolling off this year. So it's meaningful if we can cut rates and refinance at that lower rate. And it's a smart thing to do. I think that'll force people into the longer end of the curve. And I personally, people might think I'm crazy, but I think we could rally on 10 years. Right now we're at I think around 316. Maybe I'll tell you, 10 years right now are, or sorry, 417. I meant 416. So we're at 417. I think you could get 10-year bonds at 350. Wow. And I think you could get 20-year bonds around 375. And that's a huge move. So, huge. I think, the more we grow, the better it helps our debt because it means that we can actually start repaying some of this. So I'm very bullish on bonds.
Trump has talked a lot. He was talking about that recently, that, at one point in the bond market is I think he said 600 billion in debt service cost. And he's like 2 points and we could balance the budget.
He just said something a few minutes ago about that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Last question. What's going on in North Carolina after the horrific man-created storm over your valley outside of Asheville? What's going on there?
Well, things are coming back together. I'll tell you, there was a meaningful difference in Trump in his approach to resolving the situation. What I realized, I guess we talked about this before, but I was always wondering why, when I talked to was sort of, you were down here. We couldn't figure out everyone we spoke to who was a witness at what happened said there were all these dead people and you didn't hear about it. Yeah. And, as it turns out, I think FEMA was probably trying to cover those numbers up so that they could not have to divert money away from housing illegals in New York City to fixing North Carolina. And Trump really made a difference. FEMA came and did a lot of cleanups that they should have done before that under Biden. It was impactful. Asheville itself was cleaned up fairly quickly because, Asheville is a very blue area. Yeah. But the surrounding areas, it took a while. So Trump did a good job. I think we're sort of getting back to normal now. And that's behind us. So, far less trees than we had. But yeah, I think it's shaping up.
What about the death count? Has there been any realization of what is just completely swept under?
No, I think, it really kind of bothers me because I spoke to a bunch of people that were in, first responders and I remember, they saw a lot of stuff and it was just, swept under the rug. So, but again, I think when something like that doesn't make sense, there's usually somebody trying to hide something.
Yeah, completely. Tom, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate you coming on. All right, take care.
You got it. Take care.